Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Urja and I am the legal advocate here at Maitri. Before I introduce our special guest for the evening, I would like to give a little background on Maitri and the accomplishments we have achieved throughout the years. Maitri started out as a helpline service for South Asian survivors of domestic violence. We have now expanded our client services to include helpline, peer counseling, legal advocacy, economic empowerment, and transitional housing. We have now answered over 60,000 helpline calls, empowered more than 7,000 survivors, and provided 700,000 client grants and loans for medical, housing, education, emergency, and empowerment purposes. We have also developed a phenomenal outreach program in which we provide training and presentations to agencies, as well as engage members of our community to discuss topics around domestic violence. In 2001, Maitri was honored with the plaque of condemnation for serving the most vulnerable members of our community during the COVID-19 pandemic. This year, Maitri was honored to be named as Nonprofit of the Year out of 10,000 nominees. I would now like to introduce the panelists of the evening. We have here with us tonight, Chris Negri and Miranda Stiers from the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. Chris Negri is the Associate Director of Public Policy Strategies at the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. He is passionate about and dedicated to working on child welfare issues, and he is mindful of the harm that the child welfare system often inflicts on children and families affected by domestic violence, particularly youth of color and LGBTQ plus young people. Miranda Stiers began in the movement to stop domestic violence and sexual assault in 2003. As the Associate Director of Prevention, they oversee the prevention technical assistance and training, which includes the Building Change Together training and activities through the Prevention Peer Network. Lastly, on behalf of Maitri, we have Nandini Ray. Nandini has been involved in the anti-violence movement since 2011. As the Senior Manager of the Outreach and Prevention Program at Maitri, she leads community engagement and education efforts. Nandini curates, designs, and hosts Maitri's reputed podcast series, Between Friends. I would now like to hand over the stage to Nandini and begin the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Urja, for the introduction, and I hope everyone can see my slides. Urja, can you give a thumbs up if you can see the slides? Thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Nandini Ray, and thank you all for taking time to attend this Maitri event on a Friday evening. This shows your commitment in ending domestic violence and gender-based violence in our community. So thank you. And today in this session, we will focus on the importance of prevention work in the anti-violence movement. And in this limited time, we will try our best to give you a synopsis of both Maitri's and CPEDV's partnerships prevention work, the challenges we face, and the importance of funding in our work and the way forward. Also, we will request you all to think and share ideas, and in our Q&A sessions, feel free to ask questions on how to and give ideas on how to continue our prevention movement effectively. Because we all know that advocates and survivors alone cannot bring any change. We need community members, policymakers, service providers, and students, teachers, family members, basically everyone to join hands in raising awareness in prevention work. And so because as they say, it takes a village to bring the change. So I'll be happy to share Maitri's work in prevention movement. And Maitri was formed in 1991, as at that time there was a need in the South Asian community in the Bay Area for a resource that can provide culturally responsive services to South Asian DV survivors. So a small group of South Asian women started Maitri with a helpline, with a phone line to answer that community need. Now, as the helpline kept ringing, the founders and leaders of Maitri started recognizing other needs. So they started adding other programs like peer counseling, legal advocacy, transitional housing, economic empowerment, immigration assistance, mental health therapy sessions, and we kept adding all the programs based on our clients' needs, based on our community members' needs. But by creating these services, the Maitri reduced the risk of re-victimization for South Asian survivors. But we didn't have any structured strategies, structured program for our prevention work that can prevent domestic violence even before it happens. So yes, we did presentations, panels to raise awareness about the issue, but in a very limited scale. Because at that point, our intention was to gain organizational visibility so that domestic violence victims can find us and we can help them. So as the South Asian community started growing in the Bay Area and our call numbers started increasing, we realized that when community members are calling our helpline, the damage is already done. And we are helping them with their crisis and their healing process. Then Maitri leaders started thinking how to prevent domestic violence even before it happens. How can we change harmful cultural and societal norms that support domestic violence and abuse in relationships? How can we motivate our community members in creating a culture of healthy relationships? So we started planning to engage and educate community members on a large scale through different campaigns and activities. And we saw prevention work as a priority at that time and added prevention in our mission statement, along with empowering South Asian survivors of domestic violence. And we envisioned to create a society where all relationships are based on dignity, equity, and compassion. And our intention was to, engage and community in raising awareness. But before that, we saw that our interactions with the DV survivors have shown that there is no simple solution to end domestic violence, partner violence. All cases of IPV or DV occur within the context of the conditions that are already present in the community. There is a need to educate and engage community members so that they can identify those harmful conditions and they can take part in changing those social and community conditions that were contributing to contributing and enabling relationship abuse and violence. And we selected most effective methods for reaching out to community members. That is face-to-face interaction. We started doing a lot of presentations, talks, panel discussions, community meetings, listening sessions, where community members can participate in the conversation to share their understanding about the issue, challenges they are facing, and recommendation, if they had any recommendation with us. So we built a network with community-based, faith-based organizations and community leaders to establish social norms that make violence unacceptable. And we talked to service providers and visited policymakers to uphold the survivors' needs. So bottom line, we started a structured prevention program with multi-pronged approach. We also started engaging youth in our prevention work. We invited them at the same table to discuss how intergenerational cultural conflicts and harmful patriarchal gender norms can be damaging for individual families and communities, and what can we do, what can be done to eliminate those norms. And we exchanged ideas and experiences and knowledge with youth, young folks, youth students. And we also aimed in making men and youth allies in an effort to eliminate violence against women. And through different social medias. So you can see the picture, like Engaging Men, one of the very difficult social media campaigns we have been running for last 4 or 5 years. Building Health Relationship, a youth campaign, art campaign, through which we are putting seed of nonviolence, peace, and love in young minds, and helping them to envision a world with peace, love, and compassion. And we also started a podcast that in raising awareness about gender-based violence and partner violence and domestic violence, and inviting survivors, thought leaders, and community members on our platform. So as you see, this is really multi-pronged approach. We did a couple of listening sessions, a movie screening, and focus group discussions to understand the pulse of our community and where to bring change and how to bring change. We collected viewpoints, their viewpoints, and the community members' recommendations through surveys. And our survey results showed that our effort increased community members' understanding about the issue of gender-based violence, domestic violence, and need for prevention. Now they are seeing that how to recognize the red flags in partner relationships, how to talk about how to envision healthy partner relationships. And so as the community engagement got increased, it became imperative for us to continue and grow our prevention activities. And federal, state, and local government agencies grant made it easier for us to implement our plans into reality. As you can see the numbers on the slide, how much we accomplished. And so with the grant, we could hire new program staff, provide incentives to event attendees, paid for event publicities. And we can, through which we actually engaged a wide range of individuals and organizations with our prevention work. But prevention work is never easy. The South Asian community itself is a diverse community, and with intergenerational and cultural conflicts, different differing religious backgrounds, changing gender roles, family interference, and problematic social norms. So we have to be very mindful of differences within the community in crafting our messaging. One approach doesn't fit all. So we have seen that youth and young adults are more open to sharing their experiences and raising questions in a presentation setting than their adult counterparts. And adults don't want to join the conversation in public in fear that they will be judged, they will be seen as they're seeking help. So to change the mindset of adults, we started doing podcasts and social media campaigns where they can see the messagings, understand, can get educated, but not in the first place, they are not interacting with us. So we had planned different activities based on different factors in raising awareness. It is difficult, it is challenging to talk about a taboo topic, and most challenging to have people on board to talk about this taboo topic. So it is a continuous challenge, and it's time-consuming, strenuous. But we adopted different creative approach to make it, as they say, user-friendly. So requirements for prevention work is, I would say that Maitri's prevention work is based on social ecological model framework. The model explores the connection and interaction between individuals, communities, and societal factors in experiencing and reducing violence, and also in prevention efforts. So our prevention efforts address the relevance of community awareness and call for action, and not only just to include survivors and their families, but for the larger community that gets impacted by gender-based violence and partner violence, like who are in the margin community, LGBTQ plus community, the elderly, So we started engaging. We started reaching out to all, and faith-based community leaders, faith-based leaders, community-based organizations, and it is a mammoth work. To do this work, we not only need dedicated staff and volunteers, but also right strategies, policies in place, and most importantly, a constant flow of funding. So everybody here will agree with me on that part. But funding or not, we must continue our prevention work because COVID time, we saw that COVID-19 also brought a renewed urgency of prevention movement and community involvement in the anti-violence work. So it is, we have no choice but to focus on prevention. So I'm urging all the attendees to think deeply how you can help in prevention work, what you can do differently so that can add to end relationship abuse and violence in our community. As I said before, it takes a village to bring a change. And So yeah, our goal is to create a culture of zero tolerance for domestic violence, and to create that atmosphere. We must work in partnership. We must work together toward prevention work, and we really need funding to continue our work. But how can we move forward without funding to this mammoth work? It's a really important question. Now I am inviting Chris Negri from CPEDV to talk about the importance of funding in our prevention work, the current state budget in preventing funding, in prevention funding, and the future, the way forward. So Chris, stage is yours.
Okay, thank you for that, Nandini, and thank you all for the invitation to be here. I'm going to walk through the prevention funding landscape right now and some considerations for this work in 2024. One sort of proviso, and Miranda Stiers on our team is on. Miranda has a much deeper and longer experience in these issues than I do. My background is primarily in K through 12 education. So Miranda, please, if you don't mind, if as I go through this, if I err in anything, or if you have any texture or color to add, please do. But in any case, my name is Chris Negri, he, him pronouns. I'm on Tongva land down south. And I'm Associate Director of Public Policy at the Partnership. So I'm going to go through some considerations for prevention funding, some items at the front end. There is some federal funding, but we're mostly going to be dwelling on state funding for prevention. Most federal funding goes to, as you all will be aware, to intervention services, but there is some funding available for prevention, and I'll walk through that before we get to the state. So some of the, just my apologies. Some of the relevant federal funding for prevention is here, FIPSA and VAWA STOP. And those funds, the majority of them go to shelter and to intervention services, but a small amount can go, and I emphasize can go, to supportive and prevention services. So with FIPSA, Family Violence and Prevention and Services Act funds, no less than 25% of those can go to prevention services, and VAWA STOP 5%. And in substance, this is a relatively small amount of money in California, on the order of about $3 million or so. There's through FIPSA is the DV Assistance Program, or DVAP funds, which is also funded through VOCA, although VOCA funds cannot be used for prevention at all, and through state general fund dollars. And also Equality and Prevention Services for Domestic Violence Grants, which is a small grant program focused primarily if I'm correct, and please, Miranda, correct me if I'm wrong, on the LGBTQ community. And some of those funds also go to state coalition technical assistance and training, the work that the California Partnership does, and to the statewide Domestic Violence Prevention Resource Center. In other words, very little of that, this funding, or at least those two items go down to organizations, but are mostly at the coalition level. So this is what that looked like in fiscal year 2022, 2023 in California. So for FIPSA, around $9 million, VAWA Stop, $13.7 million, and VOCA, vast majority of the funds that DV agencies were receiving, $165 million. A majority of these funds went to interventions rather than prevention services. So a total of roughly $180, $190 million, and maybe $3 was available for prevention in terms of federal funding. So a very, very small minority. And Miranda, I hear you. I see you maybe adding something.
No, just concurring that it is quite challenging when there's such a small amount of funding for prevention programs that has to be disseminated across the state, and knowing that, as Nandini was sharing, that there is no one size fits all approach. You are going to have to do a varied community approach, and that can get very challenging when year to year you're looking at a completely different funding stream.
Yeah. So turning from the federal to the state, I mean, one of our priorities for years and years has been securing stable, ongoing state-level funding for prevention. And as you can see here, this is a snapshot of what that has looked like over the past 6 years. And you'll see that it is extremely variable. So in 2018, there was $10 million available in state general funds for prevention work through the SD grant program. In 2019, 5. In 2020, nothing. In 2021, 15 million. In 2022, 0. And in this last fiscal year, the fiscal year that, well, in the budget for the coming fiscal year, $2.3 million. So it has been extremely variable. And has been entirely dependent really on the state level budget landscape. And so you'll see for years when the state budget outlook was sort of sunnier, such as 2021, when California ran a budget surplus, there was greater success in securing a larger amount of prevention funds. And in this coming fiscal year, that $2.3 million reflects a less sunny budget outlook. Here are the sub-recipients for the SD program. So you'll see, a wide array of organizations all over the state have received those funds over the last 5-6 years. Depending upon how much state general funds were allocated to it. But it has really helped to sustain, important prevention work in communities all across California. There are other funding sources at the county level, county collected fees that you all might be familiar with, some of which can go to prevention funds. The critical one is perhaps the DV probationer fee, a third of which comes to the state, and half of that can go to CDPH for statewide training and education programs focused on prevention. So it's a complicated landscape, as you all will be aware. The majority of funding available goes to shelter-based programs and to intervention services, and prevention is a small piece of that, and the state contribution to it is highly variable, competitive, and small. So returning to sort of the state funds and our advocacy there, here again is what that has looked like over the last 6 years. One thing to emphasize is that every year our budget advocacy on prevention sort of starts anew. Because it is one-time funding, every year is a clean slate. And so we are just now ending our last round of budget advocacy as the state finishes its budgeting process and beginning the process for the next year. This is the timeline for that. So every year, the governor releases a proposed budget for the next fiscal year by January. And there is significant work and significant advocacy before that. That budget is then reviewed by Senate and Assembly committees and subcommittees. For DV, it goes through the Public Safety Budget Subcommittee. There is then a revised budget proposal released by May that reflects additional advocacy and review by those committees. And then there is, a deadline by June to pass a balanced budget and the start of the fiscal year by July the 1st. That is not a hard stop for the state budgeting process. For example, this past year, the $2.3 million that was secured in prevention funding didn't actually get into the budget until late August and was in a budget trailer bill that was passed August 27th or 28th. So basically then this process ran its full course, and it was only after it was pretty much wrapped up that prevention funding was sort of slotted in a trailer bill, in a cleanup bill. And what that goes to, what the point of that is that it's really a sort of all year process to advocate for this funding. And sometimes, we go down to the 11th hour in it. So why is there the variability here? As you can see, over the last 6 years, there have been years when there has been, significant funding for prevention, although never as much as we have advocated for. And in other years, there has been none or very little, like this past year. And that is because the state has yet to commit to continuing funding for prevention, but has taken a one-time approach to this. And that means that we are heavily dependent upon the political and budgetary climate, meaning that in good years when the state runs surpluses, we might be more successful in securing funding for prevention, and in other tougher years, such as this past one and the one that we are heading into, it is much more difficult. And so what that means for 2024 is that our advocacy will be, ongoing throughout the year and will be done in a tough budgetary environment. In May, the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is a significant state agency that advises the legislature on budget, estimated a $30 billion state deficit in 2024-25, the coming fiscal year. That outlook was just a projection, but it does mean that it is a difficult year for budget advocacy. Another consideration for 2024 is that our prevention budget advocacy will run along our advocacy to get state general funds to fill the VOCA shortfall, which many of you will be aware of is a significant issue with the federal funding for victim services programs. So this coming year is a difficult year. That said, we will continue to advocate for prevention funding in the coming year. So some action steps for you all. If you're interested in keeping track of the state budget process and outlook, I would urge you all to have a look at some of the resources that are available online, particularly Jason Sisney, who is an advisor to the Assembly Speaker, the budget director for the Assembly Speaker, has a Substack, a blog on the California budget that provides pretty good actionable information on where the state budget is and where revenues are. Also keeping informed via our policy roundups and policy alerts through 2023 and 2024. We'll be discussing quite a bit about prevention advocacy and also VOCA advocacy throughout the year, and joining us on Policy Advocacy Day in 2024, when one of our priorities for this year will be securing prevention funding in the state budget as it has been over the last 6 years and more. So I'm happy to field any questions that you might have. And thank you again for the opportunity to be with you all.
Thank you, Chris, for this insightful presentation. Now I would request Miranda to talk about partnerships prevention strategy and work so that we can learn from you, Miranda. Miranda? Miranda, you have to unmute, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my phone disconnected for some reason. I do apologize for that. There was a question in the chat I noticed is how does California's annual funding for domestic violence prevention compare to other states? Yes, it's a really good question. I don't know offhand, but I do know that from the National Prevention Collective, where we meet with other coalitions, there is it is a challenging landscape all across the country in terms of gaining funding. And there are absolutely fundraising efforts all throughout California to be able to try and bridge those gaps. So I just want to make sure I answered that question. I am Miranda Stiers. I use they, them pronouns, and I am joining from Nisenan Land in what is now Sacramento. And I am the Associate Director of Prevention Strategies at the partnership. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it okay. Are you seeing my slides? Okay, perfect. So with our prevention program, we have 4 folks in our prevention team. So that's Jennifer Khalifa, who is our Senior Director of Prevention Strategies, myself, and Melody Chris-Bowden and Kimmy Remus, who are both prevention specialists. And I think collectively we did the math once. It was about 70 years of experience across us. So I wanted to talk about primary prevention, especially, and really thinking about what that looks like. When you're talking about prevention, you're talking about that big picture view and having to look at something that's moving beyond educating people about just the red flags. That's incredibly valuable. And we want to also help them avoid potential abuse and about strategies to avoid becoming abusive themselves. Quite often, a lot of prevention strategies, and I know that I was definitely a part of that when I had worked in a local program, was so focused on only speaking about the likelihood of individual victimization or perpetration. And what we have to do with prevention is looking at the bigger picture way, and really thinking about the broader community as a whole. So one of the big challenges that we can have in prevention is bringing in folks all across the community to be able to have conversations about all of the different intersections that can happen in our lives that can increase the likelihood of experiencing violence or committing violence against someone else. I'm trying not to go super hard into jargon, but I do want to just kind of give a snapshot of what it can look like. A lot of times there's this idea that prevention and intervention are separate. In reality, they work very much in tandem. When we're talking about primary prevention, we're looking at that's before the violence or behavior occurs. So working on changing attitudes and norms that support the violence that we can experience in our communities. With secondary prevention, we're looking at intervening to prevent violence from happening again. So dealing with some of those short-term consequences. This can be restraining orders, shelter, case management, connecting folks to resources, safety planning. There's also tertiary prevention, which is looking at treating after the violence has occurred, looking at long-term supports for victims to heal. Sorry about all the background noise. We are all working from home, and also providing treatment to people who have caused harm. One of the things that we have really been talking about is how much primary prevention and our prevention programs can work in conjunction with our intervention programs, because ultimately, as you move through the levels of prevention, when you get to tertiary, you're going to prevent further violence from happening in that family, so future generations are not experiencing that, because quite often we do see violence happening in multiple generations, because it's the normal of what you live. Doesn't mean it's healthy, and it doesn't mean it's healthy, but normal is definitely going to be what you live. So what we look at is healthier communities. So again, primary prevention, we're looking at stopping the conditions that support violence and promoting conditions that prevent that. So looking at those norms, practices, and behaviors that are going to contribute to equitable and nonviolent relationships, healthy sexuality, and just and thriving communities. So as I say that, it's knowing that there is no one size fits all to prevention, as you had shared earlier. So it's really having to think about what is going to work for your community, and within your community, what is going to be the most effective for different age groups, because that is going to change. How we're having that conversation with parents is going to be different than how we're having that conversation with high schoolers, is different than we're having that conversation with elementary students, and also the elders in our community, and recognizing how so many folks are going to be impacted, and being sensitive to what those particular experiences are for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community within our communities, as well as the religious and cultural practices of each of our communities. So one of the challenges that we can sometimes have is trying to find, a lot of times there's this idea of one curricula that's going to address everything, and it doesn't exist. So it's really having to look at the multitude of curriculums and strategies to identify what's going to be the most effective in everyone's community. So at the partnership, one of the things that we do is providing technical assistance to prevention programs across the state. We do dedicated technical assistance for the SD and FD grantees. I know that's a lot of acronyms, but it's a sexual and domestic violence, and then the family domestic violence prevention programs, respectively. We also provide technical assistance to anyone who is looking for those services. So this can be looking at how to doing evaluation to ensure that the impact of your prevention strategy is meeting your intentions. And if they're not, then not just scrapping it, but looking at, okay, where did we miss the mark, or what was not connecting with our community, so that you can have that approach that is going to be kind of you want to create a ripple effect, essentially, so that you think of your one piece of a you're jumping into a pond, and as you are having those conversations with people and providing that education and learning from the community what their needs are as well, then you're being able to train other folks to then take that out into the community, and having that message go further, so that it's not just that individual, it's going to be all of the different people that you impact and that they impact throughout their lives, and trying to stop that generational violence that can happen. You had referenced the socio-ecological model, and that's just kind of what I'm talking about, is thinking about that ripple. If we start with the individual, working with those within their relationship scope, so this can be family members, it can be peer groups, and then working out into school, religious communities, the community at large, and then getting it onto that societal level. And some of that societal level is definitely the policy work that we are doing at the partnership, and that we do with our members, and in collaboration with our partners at Valor US and a lot of other organizations, to see what policies need to shift and what budget options there are to be able to support the important work that is happening all across the state. Challenging conversations are challenging. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it can be really daunting to have to go out and talk with community members about domestic violence and about those different dynamics, as well as sexual violence or just talking about healthy boundaries in families and how you set those and how you hold those boundaries can be very difficult. And especially when you're looking at the societal factors of institutional racism, poverty, there's so many different pieces that can come into that to be able to address those. So one of the things that we look at is providing a lot of support for prevention practitioners across the state. So we have our prevention peer network, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly because I know I'm running out of time. But we do have a resource library that is accessible for everyone on our website, and I can share that link out. So if you were looking for any kind of toolkits, resources, past webinars, we're going to have that on our resource library. We have a monthly newsletter. We also do a variety of webinars each month, and we have a monthly networking call that is come as you are. If you were interested in learning about prevention, we would love to have folks in that space. These are just some of the different types of topics that we've had. I can send out a link for joining our listserv because we do have a listserv. It's not dependent on being a member. Anybody can access it. We also have our Building Change Together training. So this is one of our skills-based trainings that we are funded to provide. And for first-time participants, we're really trying to build the foundation of understanding what prevention is, what it isn't, and really looking at this from a social justice lens with a public health approach. In session 2, we're going to dig deeper into those topics that there's just not space for as deeply as we want to in session 1. So being able to look at within the queer and trans community and how do you include them in your prevention strategies, engaging men and boys, bystander intervention, and youth leadership, not just how you start it, but also how you sustain it. Because sustainability is always forefront in our minds. We also have peer learning circles. So we have our safer school communities for anyone who's working in school-based environments and wanting to learn more about that. We have one for prevention supervisors. We are going to be starting an economic justice peer learning circle very soon. And then we have our LGBTQIA+ peer learning circle, which provides networking spaces because quite often preventionists with this kind of Tetris funding that kind of happens where you've got multiple sources and they quite often are small. So trying to piece together a full program, preventionists can be isolated. So we try to create as many opportunities as possible for folks to come together, and not just for prevention. I do want to specify all folks who are working in this field are welcome to join these spaces, or community members who are wanting to get involved to learn more about how you can effectively do prevention in these different spaces. And it provides not just learning opportunities, but a lot of networking. So preventionists can hear some of those successful strategies as well as those fabulous flops, because we learn so much from those. And that is it for me. So hopefully I have not gone too far over.
Volunteers and our event attendees came to know about your wonderful work CPEDV is doing, and I actually was going to ask our event attendees that first of all, on behalf of Maitri, I'm extending my gratitude to all the event attendees for taking time and coming to this event to learn about the prevention movement. If you have any question for Chris and Miranda or even me, feel free to ask, or you can unmute yourself, you can ask, or you can put it on the chat box. But if you don't want to ask now and think about it and send your question later, that is fine too.
I just wanted to, I answered a question in the chat of how can community members help with advocacy for prevention funding? Contact us at the partnership. We are happy to talk with you about how to go and meet with your legislators. We can help with, we can potentially help with scheduling appointments to meet with your legislators and talk to them about the importance of prevention funding and that it be ongoing, continuous funding, because the one-time funds do get very challenging because it it does take a lot of time to build those relationships in your community and to find a strategy that's going to be effective. So we encourage folks, connect with us. Also come out for our policy, become members, join our policy advocacy day. But even if you are not members, we can absolutely talk with you about meeting with your legislators and how to talk to them and to bring forward what the impacts of prevention in your communities.
Thank you, Miranda. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Seema. I might have missed it in the presentation, but once you actually get the specific funding for prevention, how do you allocate that out? What are the criteria used?
It's for Miranda or Chris, or
So
anyone can answer.
Yeah. So with that funding, once we are able to get that through the state, then ultimately California Office of Emergency Services, so Cal OES, is going to determine how to disseminate those funds. Quite often they will connect with us and Valor US staff to talk about what a potential request for proposal, so a grant application, could look like, and what are those elements. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is how programs can apply, and trying to not just stretch those dollars as far as possible, but also thinking about those having some long-term impacts. But it is up to the California Office of Emergency Services on how that's disseminated. And then in collaboration, Valor US, the partnership, and the California Department of Public Health, the three organizations work together collaboratively to provide technical assistance to those programs.
Great, thank you.
So one of the questions on the chat box, like, does the funding currently allow for outreach to high schools and colleges?
Yes, absolutely. So when programs apply for the funds, then they do have the option within that grant application, they're going to specify what they have to identify what communities they're working with the SD grant this last time. It also specified working with marginalized or underserved communities. So they had to not only identify what communities they were going to be working with, but what their ties were to that. And quite often, I don't know exactly how many, but out of the 46, I know a large percentage of those programs are doing outreach specific, or doing prevention work specifically with high schools and with colleges. And I know one of the funded programs is actually a UC.
Thank you, Miranda.
Hi, this is Seema again. Just wondering, as you all have dealt with a lot of prevention programs, what do you see as the things that set apart prevention programs that are really successful?
Sorry, I don't mean to keep taking space. One of the things that I've seen is very successful is programs that are well supported within their programs. So being able to, that sounds redundant. The more support there is within an organization for prevention, the more successful that program is going to be, because the prioritization of funding, of staffing is going to be in recognizing that prevention is a specialty, and ensuring that there is proper support, meaning staff. Having been in a local program where I was a prevention program of one, it was incredibly challenging because if I was out, then prevention didn't happen. So being able to have multiple staff and ensuring that you have a lot of cross training. So intervention and prevention staff are kind of speaking the same language. Because when I talk about the SEM model, sometimes people will look at me weird, and I'm like, okay, the socioecological. So making sure that there is that training so that prevention folks know how to do crisis intervention, because quite often there will be disclosures when they're out in the community, as well as intervention folks knowing prevention language too, because it's going to be able to help the community as a whole. And if you can do intergenerational work where you're working with folks across the lifespan, that would be incredibly impactful.
So Miranda, I completely agree with you that you need more staff, more agency support to continue your prevention work. But when we need more staff for client advocacy, for to help our clients, then how can, and if we don't have enough budget, enough funding, then how can we hire more staff to do prevention work? So it's kind of, I don't know how to solve this problem. It's, again, I wanted to talk about our prevention effort, because we don't have enough staff members in our prevention, program. We wish we could have at least 2-3 people to do more. As you know, that South Asian community is a diverse community, and the way we are approaching to engage youth community members, completely different approach we are taking to approach to our adult community members. And it's a diverse kinds of, different kinds of activities and campaigns we are running. And it's staff burnout is a real, it can happen anytime if you don't have enough support. So is there any solution you can share?
Oh, funding is so huge. And so often we're like, it's not just about funding when we're talking sustainability, but funding is so critical because you do have to have staff. You do have to have enough staff that folks can take time off for their mental health, for their just basic physical health. Utilizing volunteers is fantastic if you have volunteers who are able to dedicate time. But we also don't want to exploit community members in terms of, just don't to donate to like 20-30 hours, because I know I had times where volunteers were like, I can work 30 hours. I'm like, that's amazing, but I can't make you do that because it's a challenge. So one of the things that I would encourage folks to do as we are trying to find more funding is like, there's fundraising specifically for prevention. There's looking at private foundation funds. There's getting involved in our budget advocacy and talking to your local legislators about how critical this importance is. Talk with your school boards as well and get them involved in this so that we have not just the domestic violence organizations, but all organizations really pushing for how critical this need is. And in the interim, being able to look at budgets and how can folks within the organization be cross-trained to be able to provide support and prevention as well as intervention, so that you have, I know we often are wearing multiple hats within our organization, so you're kind of whatever you need to be on the day. Yeah, those are some of the things that can be incredibly helpful, but I know it is a challenging landscape, especially when funding is so competitive and so limited.
Thank you. And I would like to add here that we are incredibly lucky to have wonderful volunteers with us, and our volunteers are really backbone of the agency. They are doing everything, whether it is prevention work, whether it is client advocacy, whether it is development work, anything you ask and they deliver. So we are thankful to them. But as I already mentioned, that it's a mammoth work, and it's always good to have more volunteers and more staff to do this work. And hopefully one day, as you said, Miranda, that not only domestic violence agencies, we can engage and include all other agencies, all other institutions to do prevention work, to join the force. So Khaled, as we know that together we are stronger. So anyone else, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. We have still 2 more minutes. And if you want to think about more questions and you want to send the questions to Miranda or Chris, that's fine too. You can send those questions to us. I can send that to them. Or Miranda and Chris, you can Put your email on the chat box if you want, and people can share their questions with you directly, or they can send that to me and I can share with you. So thank you, Chris and Miranda, for attending this session and sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. This session highlighted one point that, yeah, together we are stronger, and our commitment in ending domestic violence, gender-based violence, and partner violence is real and powerful. So funding or not, we will continue our work, and yes, we will ask for funding for sure, but as it is vital in prevention movement, but we will continue our work, and we can support each other, and with partnership with our community members, with other organizations, institutions. And one day, I'm sure we will see a society where all relationships are built on dignity, equity, and compassion. Thank you. Thank you all for attending this event.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much.